Hello there, my name is Luca and welcome to the first ever episode of Amiable Arguments. With this particular podcast, however, you'll find it doesn't quite live up to its name in that I have no guest to argue with. So unless I end up arguing with myself, which isn't impossible, then this should just be me talking to you, explaining what Amiable Arguments is, why I started it, and most importantly, what I hope to achieve with it. Before going deeper into the heavier stuff though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself just so that we can get to know one another and hopefully help make this the warm and personable podcast that I hope to foster and create. So, where to begin? Well, I'm 24. I'm originally from the north of England. I have some skill at pulling pints. I love a good walking holiday. I've spent the majority of my most recent years looking like the love child of Matt Smith's Doctor Who and the indie singer Morrissey. Then failed enormously to try look like Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars, until this most recent lockdown when I've tried to channel more of a Benedict Cumberbatch in Doctor Strange look. I think it's working, but you can't tell, and that's fine with me, unless I ever decide to show my face, but until then. And I'm sure you'll all get to know me better as we go along, show to show. With luck, you may even like what you hear, and if not, well, that's what this podcast is all about. It's my intention to use this podcast as a platform, not simply for my own views, but for people out there who feel that they have something to say, something that concerns them, or indeed simply just to discuss something which they feel very passionately about. There are so many YouTubers and content creators out there who manage to get the big names onto their shows, whether they be politicians, journalists, or intellectuals, but that's not my intention with this show. What my hope is in creating this platform is to give a voice to those who are not the rich or famous nor the influential, but to elevate the voices of those who wish to be heard, whomever they may be, so that my guests and I can enter into the arena of scrutiny and interrogate one another's ideas in an amicable and respectful way, in the spirit of goodwill and better understanding. In full transparency with those listening, I want to be clear that this show is my direct challenge to the pernicious and censorious cancel culture that's sweeping through our societies. I believe it to be real. I believe it to be predominantly coming from the left, but not alien to the right. And I believe it has some equivalency with the baseless and ill-founded witch trials of old. And I think, honestly, it's just a matter of saying no. I think at this point, however, I should probably take a pause, perhaps elaborate on what I would define the left and right wings of politics to stand for. So, focusing historically on my own country of Britain and their influence on her, just simply because it's the one that I know about in the richest detail. The left has historically been the side of progressivism. The left has sought to continually push for the championing of social justice and wealth redistribution. The left is the side of greater strides for equality and the dismantling of rigid social hierarchies, and oftentimes its solution to these perceived problems is through a stronger central government and the implementation of socialist policies such as the nationalisation of key industries and the establishment of a minimum wage. The further left on this political axiom that one goes, they'll eventually hit the point of communism, which claims to believe that society should be a stateless, classless world. And if the left is the side of progressivism and equality, then the right is the side that leans towards traditionalism and more conservative values. So theoretically, the right believes in opposition to the left that a limited government is the surest way to give people more individual liberty and control over their lives, so that they can compete in a free market and generate new wealth for themselves and others. and the right gets its foundation in the validity of property rights. And the further to the right that you go, the smaller the state becomes, so the government has less power to regulate businesses and corporations as they become the real power over people's lives in an anarcho-capitalist society. So now that I've laid that out, I'm sure that many will find a healthy amount to dispute in what I've just said, but that's all part of the process, and I welcome it gladly. So, to tie all of this back into cancel culture, I think it's propagated mainly out by the left out of a somewhat noble desire to protect. And after almost 2 centuries from starting out seeking to protect workers' rights and standards in the Industrial Revolution, we've now come to the point of wanting to protect people's identities and criticism of those identities. And thus begins the Great Debate. And this culture of censorship, deplatforming and discrediting has been accelerated by the inquisitions of social media, who continually believe that they have the moral high ground to often get someone fired from their job or silenced after forming a well-rounded view of the target's life and worldview, often based on 3 sentences of text. Although it's far from the only example I can give, I will just go into a little detail with the case that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and that case was Gina Carano. Although the story garnered a huge response in the media, I will briefly go through the outline of the events that took place, for those who are unfamiliar with it, but not so that this becomes some sort of detailed autopsy report for a career with Lucasfilm. Her alleged offences are threefold, as far as I can tell. 1. Transphobia. 2. She called for greater protection against voter fraud in the US election, which I suppose thereby insinuates that perhaps the outcome may have not been legitimate. And thirdly, she allegedly compared the state under which Jews suffered under the Nazi regime to that of modern-day Republicans living in America. I believe her firing to be a great disservice and injustice to her character and her professional career. For every allegation against her, I could find a repudiating tweet that either contradicts it or shows that she's since changed her opinions. The accusation of transphobia is predicated on her use of beep bop boop in her Twitter bio. Now, Gina claims during her interview with Daily Wire host Ben Shapiro that this has been her way of defiantly standing against those on Twitter trying to tell her what she could and couldn't tweet. And irrespective of whether you accept that reasoning, what is incontrovertible is that the people wishing for the death of her career seem not to take into account what happened after that, which is a conversation with her colleague and friend Pedro Pascal, in which he explained why he thought pronouns were important, and crucially, this shifted Gina's opinion. Now, I won't go much into the second point, as I think it to be such a non-issue at this point that I shouldn't have to take the time to explain why it's in the best interests of all parties involved to have surer and safer elections. But the last crime is the one I truly wish to confront and refute. Quoting what Gina posted to her Instagram is as follows: Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazis, but by their neighbours, even by children, because history is edited. Most people today don't realise that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbours hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? So, those that castigated her for this seem to claim that she's undermining the Holocaust, or simply labelling this as an anti-Semitic message. I can't think of an angle, personally, from which this could be construed as anti-Semitic, as it clearly portrays the suffering of the Jews in this period of history as unjust and deeply harrowing. And second of all, with the best will in the world, it's hard not to believe that some people are purposely missing the point or misrepresenting her position here. The ethos of her message is that we're living in serious tribal and divided times, as we continually seem to find less and less in common with the people around us, and we retreat to our clans in our moated, echo-chambered castles and roar up the bridges. I don't think it should be a controversial view to say what this message of Gina's is driving at, that the collapse of our societies and the persecution of a group of citizens cannot be achieved until the other members of that society will no longer sympathise or defend those in danger, but will instead agree that these people are the enemy. More concisely, persecution starts with alienation and othering. Now, I want to be clear, at no point in her post did Gina mention Republicans or Democrats. Both sides are able to achieve this. For every liberal, in the American sense of the word, that wishes for more social welfare, that's labelled a commie libtard, and every Republican that's called a racist fascist bigot for wanting to fortify the nation's borders and not have open borders. This othering is ubiquitous across the ideological camps. Now, however, posts like Gina's that are a call for less hate and more dialogue are discarded, ironically, because people can't seem to see that they're perpetuating the very thing that she's trying to warn against. Now, I know that I've spoken quite a while now, but I would just like to conclude this point that if the standard is upheld, that any attempts to draw equivalencies with Nazis is a sackable offence, then there are many others at Lucasfilm, and indeed in many of the large corporations and workplaces, who should also be sacked for them. For instance, Pedro Pascal, the lead actor on The Mandalorian, posted to his Instagram a photo likening Trump supporters with both Nazis and the Confederate South. I strongly disagree with this comparison, but you will not hear me calling for the man to lose his job. In her summarising of the philosophy of Voltaire, the British writer Evelyn Beatrice Hall coined the phrase, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." When I was a child growing up, I was taught that that notion was as precious as water. I do defend Pedro's right to say it, and I defend Gina's too. And this sentiment and right that I possess, I treasure more gratefully than any material good I could obtain in this world. I do not want to live in a world where partisan Twitter mobs, irrespective of their political persuasion, hold more power over people's lives than those whom I have relationships with as colleagues, friends, family or acquaintances, and other people who know me best. The gulf between people seems to be growing wider and wider, and the more it does, the less hope we have that people with different views can be reasoned with. And so I invite anyone and everyone to drop a comment below the video to help empower me to play this part in turning down the temperature and returning to the idea that we can have civilised dialogue and discourse and healthy disagreement, whilst simultaneously knowing that we're all flawed but are simply trying to muddle our way through the complicated enigma of life. If anyone would like to go a step further and be a guest on my show, then don't hesitate to drop an email in the link in the description down below. Just give me your name, what you'd like to talk about and why, and I'll endeavour to get as many different voices as I can on the show. And I'd like to just give a shout out to my friend Irina for her fantastic work when she designed the artwork that's currently championing the podcast and the show. And I'll also leave a link down below to her art pages if you want to go check those out and help support her work. So thank you to everyone that's listened to what I've had to say. I'm grateful for you simply listening to this far, and I'd be even more grateful if you'd like to listen further. Until then, take care.